There's no question it is a difficult issue, but the government has come up with a solution to the small boats migration problem today that they can't even say is legal.
If you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum. You can't benefit from our modern slavery protections. You can't make spurious human rights claims.
Nor does it seem likely to deter would-be migrants waiting in Calais.
Is that going to stop you trying to get there?
No, of course not. That's my dream, to go there.
The government even acknowledges on the very face of the bill that it may not be legal, in which case surely it won't work. And if so, one has to ask, what is the point of it? We will try to get to the bottom tonight of a very complex issue. Also on News at 10. The US, China says, is heading for confrontation and conflict in the Pacific. The Ukrainian president vows to hunt down the Russians who shot dead a prisoner of war. Is the end finally in sight for rail strikes? New developments tonight.
And the whole entire world. Hold on, let me just finish up.
Ambitions of just being slightly better than the rest of the UK.
And of course,
The SNP's would-be leaders trade blows in the first televised debate this evening, and the hive mind, new evidence of the brilliance of bumblebees.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. It is unconventional, to say the least. Almost everyone would acknowledge the small boat migration issue is extremely complex and hard to solve. But it comes to something when the government cannot even say its bold new policy is legal. Indeed, it concedes the point on the very front of the bill it is asking MPs to pass, which surely begs the question, how will it work then? The promise to stop the boats was, of course, one of 5 pledges the Prime Minister has staked his entire premiership upon. If you've forgotten the others, the whole list was emblazoned on the backdrop behind him today. The big idea is to prevent people from claiming asylum if they arrive in the UK by so-called illegal means. They will be detained, removed, and face a lifetime ban on returning. But campaigners say that would break key legal commitments towards refugees, and it is generally considered a given in democratic politics that lawmakers should not be lawbreakers. Labour called it government by gimmick.
Last week, Brexit. This week, Rishi Sunak turning his sights to a new challenge: how to control the number of people arriving into Britain on small boats.
Here we go.
The PM claims he can engineer a solution to this complex problem by bringing in the UK's toughest ever asylum policy.
To make clear that if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum. You can't benefit from our modern slavery protections. You can't make spurious human rights claims. And you can't stay.
The Small Boats Bill aims to prevent anyone arriving this way from claiming asylum, with the Home Secretary compelled to remove them as soon as reasonably practicable, to Rwanda or another safe third country. And there'll be an annual cap on the number of refugees, which MPs will vote on. In Parliament, Labour argued the policy wouldn't work.
Slogans and not solutions, just government by gimmick, ramping up the rhetoric on refugees but picking fights simply to have someone else to blame.
There was plenty of support on the Tory backbenches.
I support this bill,
rather than the open borders calls from opposite.
But one concern. The Home Secretary has admitted on the face of today's bill that the legislation may not comply with the European Convention on Human Rights, raising the prospect of major legal challenges.
Will my right honourable friend promise that if it is frustrated by the European Convention on Human Rights, that we will commit to leave it?
So some Tory MPs want to go further than today. But for the UN's refugee agency, this policy already goes too far.
It's essentially a ban on asylum. It basically extinguishes the right to seek asylum in the UK for people arriving irregularly, and that's a clear breach of the Refugee Convention.
In Feltham, recent arrivals, many who came by boat, are learning English. The founder of the charity that runs this project says people who attempt that journey are desperate.
This policy, it will, in contrast, increase
the number of refugees to find different routes.
More dangerous routes?
Yes, more dangerous routes.
Dr Nassimi came to Britain in the back of a lorry, locked in a refrigerated container. The PM insists his policy is compassionate, but he has a political and legal fight ahead. Anush Gristana, News at 10.
For decades, successive governments have tried to talk tough about cracking down on illegal asylum claims. But to get an idea of just how little those words have resulted in action, you only need to look at the numbers. The latest figures for the 12 months to last June show applications rising to their highest level in nearly 2 decades, to more than 63,000. Up against those rising figures, near record lows are being forcibly removed. In the year to September, there had been just over 3,500 so-called enforced returns. That's half the number before the pandemic, just a few years ago. Perhaps no wonder then that those in camps in Calais are unfazed in pursuing Britain's shores.
Imagine leaving your home and family 3,000 miles behind you, only to end up here. Sheltering inside the tents are hundreds of men from Sudan who, having spent more than a year getting this far, have no intention of ending their journey by applying for asylum here.
I want to go to UK really, because I'm not safe. I don't feel safe here. They don't like us here.
Why do you want to go to the UK in particular?
I like that nice place and I feel safe there, you know.
Omar, it's not his real name, says he was just 14 when he left Darfur 3 years ago. Last night he tried to smuggle himself onto a lorry. Tonight he'll try again.
So the government is planning to change the law so that anybody who gets in illegally will be detained, deported, and possibly will never be allowed to come back into the UK. Is that going to stop you trying to get there?
No, of course no. That's my dream, to go there, and I want to live the life like the other human.
It's the same answer in every corner of this camp.
They go in London.
Ask anyone here why they fled Sudan and they'll tell you about the war that left them in fear for their lives. But they're willing to endure these dreadful conditions because despite those years of violence, there is no safe or formal way for them to apply for asylum in the UK. This is their only option.
Last year, over 80% of Sudanese asylum seekers who made it to England had their claims approved, and that hope outweighs the risks. If the remains of flimsy dinghies littering the beaches here are no deterrent, why would the threat of detention or deportation be any worse?
Firstly, I don't think it's ever going to work.
Jess runs the Care for Calais operation, helping the refugees here.
Rwanda didn't act as a deterrent. People are desperate, they have a reason to be in the UK. Something like this is not going to stop them. What it is going to do, most likely, is push people underground.
In France, preoccupied today by nationwide strikes over the retirement age, the UK's plans haven't even made the news, let alone affected the determination of the desperate to reach Britain's shores. Rachel Younger, News at 10, Calais.
And Robert is here to talk about all this. Look, I think we all totally accept, A, that this is a very complex and hard issue to resolve, right? So let's just say that first off. And secondly, we know a lot of people are very concerned about it. But genuinely, what is the point of a bold new solution that might not be legal? Because if it's not legal, presumably it's not workable.
So it's not quite clear to me whether this is going to turn out to be worse for the government if it's legal or illegal. So let's just give them benefit of the doubt. Rishi Sunak said to me when I asked him again today that he thinks it's lawful. If it is lawful, then you've just heard from Rachel, thousands of asylum seekers are almost certainly still going to come across the Channel. They are going to be detained, effectively put in prison for 28 days. They're going to be told they are never going to be British citizens. They won't be able to work. They won't be able to get benefits. What's going to happen to them after 28 days? They're going to be put onto the streets. Is the government going to relent at that point and put them in ghastly hotels for months and years? Actually, is sort of what's happening at the moment. It doesn't look like much of a solution for the very simple reason that it only works if Rishi Sunak pulls off the other big thing he's got to do, which is to persuade other countries like France or Germany or other European Union countries to take some of these people, or he persuades the British courts that deporting them to Rwanda is lawful, which the British courts have not yet ruled on. Now, that's if it's lawful. Doesn't look that great for a government because it won't solve the problem. If it's not lawful, then I presume that the Tory party lurches in what many would say is in a liberal direction at the time of the general election and campaigns at the general election for pulling out the European Convention on Human Rights and ignoring things like the Refugee Convention and, saying we're perfectly happy breaching international law. Again, some would say not a good look for a traditional Tory party.
OK, we will see. For now, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to China now, where relations with the West and specifically the United States could hardly be more strained, what with the two sides facing off over Taiwan, technology and trade, to say nothing of their strikingly different approaches to Ukraine. Well, now Beijing's man in Washington is back in the People's Republic, striking a distinctly combative tone. The US, he says, is heading for conflict and confrontation, and he left little doubt that China would be prepared.
The latest military propaganda suggests China is readying for war. There is an ancient saying about the inevitability of conflict when an emerging power threatens an established power, and it feels like China and the United States are testing that theory. The Chinese president talks of peace, but at this week's Communist Party gathering, he warned Washington not to block his country's rise. And this is the man Xi Jinping has chosen to chart China's hardening foreign policy. Qin Gang was promoted to the role of foreign minister after serving a term as the Chinese ambassador to the United States. He has risen fast through the ranks of government to take the top job, and he used his first press conference to compare the US to a runaway train heading towards catastrophe.
If the United States does not hit the brake, but continue to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails can prevent derailing. And there will surely be conflict and confrontation, which will bear catastrophic consequences.
Going down. America's response to the apparently innocent spy balloon that floated into its airspace was cited as the latest source of spiraling diplomatic relations. But it is tensions around Taiwan which is giving the gravest cause for concern. China continues to send its fighter jets across the straits, most recently last week when the US approved another arms sale to Taipei. The new foreign minister came prepared for a question on Taiwan. He had a copy of the Chinese constitution to hand and read a passage which states it is an inalienable part of China.
The Taiwan question is the core of the core interests of China, the bedrock of the political foundation of China-US relations, and the first red line that must not be crossed.
He later accused the United States of provoking bloc confrontation and plotting an Asia-Pacific NATO.
No Cold War should be reignited, and no Ukraine-style crisis should be repeated in Asia.
The two-hour press conference was largely scripted, with questions submitted in advance. The new foreign minister keen to control his assertive narrative.
And Debbie joins us from Beijing. Debbie, pretty strong words from China's new foreign minister, really, but I guess one could dismiss that as rhetoric. But what do we take away from them about how the country will actually act in the future?
Well, Tom, the last thing we need is a more belligerent China, but judging by what the foreign minister had to say, that is where we're headed, and it is likely to manifest itself in a more assertive, a more combative approach to foreign policy, with everything being framed around that rivalry between China and the United States. The foreign minister was asked about relations with Japan, with Saudi Arabia, with the EU, and of course with Russia, but in each answer he kept coming back to the role the US was playing in provoking confrontation. President President Xi has also made a rare direct attack on the US at this week's political gathering. He accused the United States of the encirclement, the containment, the suppression of China in words reminiscent of the criticisms President Putin has made of NATO and the West. Today we learnt that the Taiwanese president has asked the US Speaker of the House not to go to Taiwan. Xi is clearly concerned about how quickly, how easily Beijing's threats could turn into an attack on the island. Xi Jinping is this week cementing his grip on domestic power, and now he is seeking to expand his sphere of influence.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much. Now, as Ukraine's longest and bloodiest battle rages on in Bakhmut, there has been another shocking example of Russia's brutality against Kyiv's troops. A soldier who had been fighting in the eastern region has apparently been identified in a grim video circulating online. The man, said to be an unarmed prisoner of war, makes one final declaration of his loyalty before his life is mercilessly cut short.
According to the Ukrainian government, this is both a war crime and unimaginable bravery. The prisoner is unarmed. We won't show the video, but he barely had time to utter the words "Glory to Ukraine" before being shot multiple times. The Ukrainian military identified him as Timofey Shadura, a member of the 30th Mechanized Brigade who was sent to war 3 months ago. They said he'd been missing since February the 3rd near Bakhmut, which has seen intense fighting over recent weeks as Russian forces tried to recapture the town. The graphic video has now gone viral, shared on social media and on television. The caption calls those who killed him animals. President Zelensky condemned the killing and urged everyone to repeat the words, "Glory to Ukraine."
This murder explains everything about this genocidal war. A Ukrainian man was clearly murdered simply for expressing his Ukrainian identity and love for his homeland.
A legal expert has described it as a willful killing.
Beyond what is considered to be reasonable in the context of warfare. And I think, judging by the image, we can agree that this is a war crime.
Timofey Shadura's face has quickly been turned into wartime propaganda. The image repeated in multiple forms, his courage a rallying cry to his fellow citizens. His story has already been repeated on the battlefield. A fellow soldier invokes his name before firing on Russian lines.
It gave us even more determination to fight for our country against the enemy.
Timofey Shadura did not survive the war, but the manner of his death may outlast the conflict. Ian Woods, News at 10.
There have been violent protests tonight in Georgia, where a planned law is running up against significant opposition from critics who say it marks an authoritarian shift for the former Soviet state. There were reports of demonstrators throwing petrol bombs at police. Authorities responded with tear gas and water cannon. It is feared the draft legislation would require dozens of independent organisations and media outlets to register as so-called foreign agents. Back here, a court today heard a vivid account of the panicked and indeed chaotic scene that played out in a Liverpool street one summer last year. Jurors were told how it culminated in 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell screaming out to her mother seconds before she was shot dead in her own home. The alleged gunman, Thomas Cashman, denies the girl's murder.
Olivia Pratt-Corbell was 9 years old when she was shot dead in the middle of her school summer holidays. She was at home with her family, standing on the staircase when an armed man burst in and brought her life to an end. Her mum Cheryl, seen here in the middle, sister Chloe and brother Ryan to her right, came to court knowing they would have to relive the horror of that night. The court heard that Cheryl Corbell had a couple of friends round and they were drinking tea and chatting when they heard what sounded like fireworks or gunshots coming from outside. She opened the door to see what was happening, and in the commotion that followed, 2 men tried to force their way into her home. One of them had a gun. As she desperately tried to keep the door shut, Olivia came down the stairs behind her shouting, "Mum, I'm scared." Seconds later, a shot was fired. It went through their front door, through Cheryl Corbell's wrist and into the chest of her 9-year-old daughter. The prosecution today described this as a shooting that had gone horribly wrong. Carried out, they say, by 34-year-old Thomas Cashman. His intended target, a man called Joseph Nee. The jury was told that Cashman was lying in wait for Joseph Nee with not one weapon but two, and that when Nee left his friend's house just before 10 p.m, Cashman chased him along Kings Heath Road and fired 3 shots, one of which hit him in the torso. But Nee managed to get up and keep running. He was looking for somewhere to hide, the court heard, when he saw a door open. It was the Corbell family's front door. Thomas Cashman denies all the charges against him. The prosecution say this is a case about his ruthless pursuit to shoot Joseph Nee at all costs, including taking the life of a 9-year-old girl. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
Around 1,000 people gathered for a vigil this evening for the 3 people found dead after a car crash in Cardiff. Balloons were released and people lit candles and flares to remember them. There was also a firework display lasting around half an hour to celebrate their lives. It came as the regulator launched an investigation into how police handled the search after they'd been reported missing. After wreaking havoc on the railways for months, tonight there appears to have been a degree of progress in the RMT's long-running dispute over pay. Hallelujah, you may say. The union has a suspended strike action planned for its Network Rail members next week. And John is here to talk about all this. Dare we hope for good news? John, is this a breakthrough?
Well, it raises that hope tonight, Tom. It is not the end, not yet at least, of the torment of rail passengers, but things are moving. The RMT, as you say, has suspended the industrial action planned by its members who work for Network Rail. They run the stations, the signals, maintenance and so forth. The union says it's had a better payoff, a better than the 9% over 2 years. That will be put to its members, though there's no time for scale for that. However, there is still walkouts going to take place by those members who work for the train operating companies themselves. Those dates for your diary, 16th, 18th and 30th of March and the 1st of April. But those strikes will probably have much less impact now. Is there a deal in the offing? Well, we spoke to a source at the Rail Delivery Group, the train operators' representatives tonight. They say, look, we're not aware of anything new happening. They've said they've tabled their best and final offer. The RMT said a bit cryptically, stand by for further announcements. Intriguing, Tom. If this is an end or the beginning of the end, it really can't come soon enough for those passengers who've suffered so dismally for month after month.
Good. Intriguing's good. Intriguing's better than nothing. OK, John, thank you very much indeed. Now, the vast majority of those hoping to snap up tickets for this year's Eurovision in Liverpool were left disappointed this lunchtime. Within barely half an hour, all the seats for the grand final had sold out. Many struggled even to get through to the booking website. The virtual queue appeared to crash just before noon. Why are some things not surprising? Some tickets, though, have since appeared for unofficial resale, being touted for several £1,000. Just let's face it, it's not surprising either. Now, tonight's televised debate between the would-be leaders of the SNP over who should be Scotland's next First Minister began to open up some of the battle lines between the candidates. Kate Forbes, at one point the front-runner, but whose early campaign has been overshadowed by her socially conservative views. Humza Yousaf, seen by many as the continuity candidate, really, and who today secured the significant endorsement of Angus Robertson. And Ash Regan, something of an outsider, who's still yet to receive the backing of any current Scottish Government ministers.
In the first TV debate in the face-off to be First Minister, candidates got straight to the point. The end of Nicola Sturgeon will not be the end of the SNP's push for independence.
I will build support for independence to new heights, where the will of the Scottish people can no longer be denied.
The SNP has lost its way. There's been no progress on independence in the last few years, despite the worst UK governments of all time.
It's time for change. Continuity won't cut it.
That last point was a dig at Humza Yousaf, who is now favourite and called himself the continuity candidate. And Kate Forbes kept going.
Well, Humza, you've had a number of jobs in government. When you were Transport Minister, the trains were never on time. When you were Justice Minister, the police were strained to breaking point. And now, as Health Minister, we've got record high waiting times.
Kate Forbes started this campaign as favourite. Tonight she was trying to make up for lost ground.
Who better than somebody who's had the experience of delivering multi-billion-pound budgets, negotiating with the UK government and winning?
Well, actually, if I remember correctly, you had said at the time that the UK government shortchanged us by about £1 billion.
They did.
You managed to get £400. You sold us about £600 million short.
Humza Yousaf now has the backing of the big names in his party, with more public endorsements than the other two combined.
You've had many people, particularly from our LGBTQ community, say they won't vote for independence if you're the leader. Forget persuading no voters, you can't even keep yes voters on side.
Ash Regan is still the outsider in this race. Tonight she was trying to set herself apart from the other two.
While we are making preparations to become an independent country, because you're absolutely right, this cannot go on. It is an absolute scandal that children are going to bed hungry, they're going to bed cold. We cannot let this continue.
So what would you do?
I would get the best people in the room and we would devise a plan for how we are going to, or what we can do under devolution.
This was more robust disagreement than we've seen in the SNP for decades. And in less than 3 weeks, one will have to succeed Nicola Sturgeon and the party will have to unite behind their new leader, taking the battle for independence to Rishi Sunak. If nothing else, they've all shown tonight they will not shy away from a fight. This was quite an extraordinary exchange tonight. We almost have to remind ourselves that these three candidates are in the same party, and when all of this is done, they will have to unite and somehow present an image of the SNP being one happy family. We had cabinet ministers attacking other cabinet ministers on their record in government. Kate Forbes at one time said she wouldn't keep Humza Yousaf as health secretary. But while they're appealing to SNP members who will decide this vote, they also have to remember they're trying to be the next First Minister of Scotland, a country they have to unite.
OK, Peter, thank you very much indeed. Well, some football, and Chelsea manager Graham Potter can breathe a big sigh of relief tonight after they beat Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League. Chelsea had only won twice in the last 12 games. Raheem Sterling scored first. Kai Havertz then scored a second-half penalty to make it 2-1 on aggregate. Finally, to a bit of research causing something of a buzz amongst biologists. Experts say they've shown that bumblebees can not only solve puzzles, but actually pass on their knowledge of the solution to the rest of the colony. It suggests the insect's ability to learn from others may be far greater than previously imagined. So is this further evidence of the hive mind?
We knew bees were complex. Now scientists say they have culture, are influenced and learn from each other as behaviour is shared within an intricate insect society. This is the experiment that proved it. A demonstrator bumblebee is trained to push the red tab to open the puzzle and reach the sugar. Other bees watched, then copied, choosing the same method 98% of the time.
What this created was like a trend, a fashion trend, or in animal behaviour terms, a tradition.
That might be something we associate with monkeys or birds, but not bumblebees.
Actually, what our bees are doing is maybe even more impressive. They have brains the size of a pinhead, yet they're still able to produce this behaviour.
Finding out that bees have culture, that they follow trends from each other, might make you think, they're like us. But scientists say we should be less human-centric, that these elaborate insect civilizations in fact prove that we're not that superior.
We do tend to assume that whatever humans can do is some kind of evolutionary pinnacle. This way of looking at it has meant that we've missed some really fascinating capabilities found among even tiny invertebrates.
Professor Lars Chitka has been studying bees for 30 years.
I think it shows that we're not alone on the planet, that there are kinds of alien civilizations right around us. There is something out there that I think has its own legitimacy and is worth protecting out of respect.
And so you've completed your PhD, you're now...
This study earned Alice her PhD, but also so many bee stings, she's now developed an allergy.
I might go for the stingless bees.
And can no longer get too close. Maybe these sophisticated creatures know even more than we think. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
That's it. See you tomorrow. Good night. Thanks for watching.